And so yesterday we explored the meaning and the symbolism of the four horsemen, that depiction of sword, famine, and plague. Things that the people receiving this letter would be familiar with, not only in their own time, but also through the images and the writings of the Old Testament. Three things as we look through the Old Testament that were often associated with God's judgment: sword, famine, and plague. But they would have also seen these as reminders that political challenge or statement against Rome, that Rome's promise of peace and prosperity was simply a myth, and that only God alone can truly bring peace and prosperity. And now we come to these next two seals as they're broken. And the seventh seal we'll see is broken or opened in chapter 8. And as the fifth seal is opened, John's vision changes, and he now sees the souls of the saints. Now, we're not to confuse this with Paul's language in 1 Corinthians 15, where he talks about sleep as being this sort of intermediate state of God's children. And here, these people who have died, rather than sleeping, as Paul suggests, clearly are awake and under the altar. We mustn't confuse that. John is not contradicting Paul. The symbolism of John's vision is more to encourage his readers, although at first glance we might not see this as that encouraging. What John sees in this vision is the children of God who stood firm, who did not fall to temptation or assimilation, but who held on. And the picture of them under the altar indicates their lives being acceptable, pleasing to God as an offering. And we see their plea, how long? And we hear in that an echo from the Old Testament, both the Psalms and the prophets. How long, O Lord? Come, Lord Jesus, come. And we might say, well, this doesn't sit well with love your enemy. Their cry to have sort of vindication, as it were, doesn't quite sit with Jesus' teaching, love your enemy. But what we need to see, and what John is communicating, is that this cry to God is less a cry for revenge and more a cry for divine justice. Again, a common theme throughout both the Old and the New Testament, that heartfelt cry as we look at the injustice, the abuse, and the violence in the world, and we say, please, Lord, do something. And we see that these saints are given white robes. Again, we see that as the promise to the church in Sardis, that idea of purity, of honor, of righteousness. And then it seems strange that they're sort of told, well, hang on a bit. In fact, they're not told to hang on and wait. They are, in fact, told to rest. That sense of reward, of being in God's presence, of being at peace. Again, an echo from the Old and the New Testament, and what might spring to mind are Jesus' words, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And they have to rest until these fellow servants are martyred as they were. But who are these fellow servants who are to be killed as they had been? And again, we need to see this more as symbolic than literal. All of these seven churches were suffering for their faith, and many had given their lives, and we sense that in some of the letters. And what we also need to see is that the original text, the original Greek, does not have the word number in it. So in the NIV, we read, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed had been completed. That idea that, and we tend to think then God's got this sort of list. There's number 72, 73, 74, and counting them down. But actually, the original Greek does not have the word number. It reads much more, they should rest a time until shall be fulfilled both their fellow bondsmen and brethren, those being about to be killed. There's something here about witness. And just as the martyrs, these saints under the altar, had been faithful, so their brothers and sisters, those reading the letter, are encouraged to remain faithful too, even to the point of death. And we see within this a second encouragement. It's God's timing. It's God's timing that is at work. It is for a little while, and therefore it is bearable. And the reward, the promise, is that we will join those who have gone before us. And then the sixth seal is opened, and the series reaches its climax. The fullness of God's judgment is revealed and understood. And these last few verses are just littered with familiar Old Testament apocalyptic language. The sky turning black, stars falling out, everything being rolled up, mountains falling, and so on. And John shows how those who do not know God, those who have chosen not to know God, from the least to the greatest, John shows how when God's judgment becomes visible, who will be able to stand against God's judgment? And in these closing verses of the chapter, we see that echo. The choices we make here in this life, God will confirm in the next life. And so I'll finish there.